A chance encounter in the snow. The snow was relentless, blanketing the streets of Silver Lake in a quiet, frozen stillness. The winter wind howled, cutting through layers of clothing and chilling anyone brave enough to step outside. Diana Cooper, a 34-year-old veteran, walked purposefully through the abandoned streets, her boots crunching against the snow-covered pavement. She had been out for hours, trying to clear her mind, though lately that felt like an impossible task. 6 months had passed since she left the military, yet civilian life felt alien to her, like trying to fit into clothes 2 sizes too small. She glanced up at the dim orange glow of a street lamp, its light barely penetrating the thick flurries. Her neighborhood park, Jefferson Green, loomed ahead. Normally lively, the park was now deserted, its swings and benches cloaked in a heavy frost. As Diana entered the park, her thoughts drifted to her time in service. It had been easier, in a way, structured, predictable, with clear enemies and allies. Now the silence of her days was deafening, leaving her alone with memories she'd rather forget. She exhaled sharply, watching her breath form a misty cloud before dissipating into the frigid air. A dark shape against the sea of white jolted her out of her reverie. At first, she thought it was a discarded coat or a garbage bag, half buried in the snow. But something, an instinct she hadn't lost, made her stop and squint through the falling snowflakes. Her heartbeat quickened as she realized it wasn't a coat at all. Diana sprinted toward the figure. As she drew closer, the shape solidified into that of a person, lying face down near a cluster of bare trees. Her military training kicked in as she dropped to her knees, ignoring the icy sting against her skin. The figure was a boy, maybe 15 or 16, his dark skin a frightening grayish-blue hue from the cold. He was unconscious, his body alarmingly still. "Hey, can you hear me?" Diana called out, her voice urgent. She rolled him onto his back with practiced care, her fingers immediately checking for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. Relief mingled with alarm as she noticed the frost clinging to his eyelashes and the unnatural tint to his lips. He was dangerously close to hypothermia. "Come on, kid. Wake up," she urged, rubbing his arms to stimulate circulation. Her hands worked methodically, but her mind raced. Who was he? How long had he been out here? And why was no one looking for him? After what felt like an eternity, his eyes fluttered open. They were a deep brown, glassy with pain and confusion. He tried to speak, but his voice was barely audible, a mere rasp against the howling wind. "My fault," he mumbled, tears welling up and spilling down his frozen cheeks. "I tried to save him, but I couldn't. Now, they're coming for me." Diana's breath caught. The boy's words were fragmented, but the anguish in his voice was unmistakable. He was carrying a burden far heavier than someone his age should bear. "It's okay," she said softly, her tone steady but urgent. "You're safe now. What's your name?" "Liam," he whispered, his lips trembling. "Liam Daniels." "All right, Liam. I'm Diana. Let's get you out of this cold, okay?" She hoisted him up, her arms sliding under his knees and shoulders. He was painfully light, his frame too thin for someone his height. Diana began the trek back to her apartment, her mind swirling with questions. As she carried Liam through the deserted streets, his head lolled against her shoulder. Every few minutes, he mumbled incoherently, lost in whatever nightmare had driven him into the snow. She adjusted her grip, her muscles straining against his weight and the pull of her own thoughts. What had happened to him? Who was after him? And why? And what did he mean by "my fault"? Each question only deepened her resolve to protect him. Her small third-floor apartment came into view, a modest space that felt more like a barracks than a home. She pushed through the door, the warmth inside hitting her like a wave. Carefully, she laid Liam on the couch, wrapping him in a thick blanket. He stirred slightly, his breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, Diana stood over him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. She had promised herself she wouldn't get involved in anyone else's problems when she left the service. But something about Liam's broken whispers and tear-streaked face ignited an old instinct she thought she'd buried. This wasn't just about saving a life. It was about uncovering the truth behind his pain and confronting her own in the process. As Diana sat nearby, keeping watch over the boy, she couldn't shake the feeling that her quiet life was about to become anything but. Whispers of the past. Liam awoke to the faint hum of a space heater and the soft aroma of something warm and familiar. Chicken soup. His eyes fluttered open, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The room was modest, almost Spartan. A faded rug covered the hardwood floor, and mismatched furniture spoke of practicality rather than design. A single picture hung on the wall, a military unit standing shoulder to shoulder in full gear. For a moment, he panicked, sitting up too quickly. The room spun, and his head throbbed with the memory of biting cold and fear. Then he saw her, Diana, sitting in an armchair across the room, her expression unreadable. "You're safe," she said softly, setting a steaming mug on the coffee table. "Tea. It'll help." Liam hesitated before wrapping his hands around the mug. Its warmth seeped into his frozen fingers. He took a cautious sip, his eyes darting around the room. I need to go," he muttered, his voice hoarse and shaky. He tried to stand, but his legs betrayed him, buckling beneath him. Diana was on her feet in an instant, steadying him before he collapsed back onto the couch. "You're not going anywhere until you're warmed up and stable," she said firmly. "You'll hurt yourself worse." Liam's eyes darted to the windows and the door, his body tense with a wariness that didn't match his age. Diana recognized it instantly, the posture of someone who felt hunted. "You don't trust me," she said, sitting back in her chair but keeping her gaze steady. "That's fine. But I didn't carry you out of the snow just to see you run off and freeze again." Liam said nothing, his grip tightening on the mug. Diana leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "Do you remember what happened?" she asked. "Why you were out there?" He flinched, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then his voice broke through the silence, fragile and strained. "My dad," he began, staring into the mug as if it held the answers he sought. "He worked at Carlton Industries. He found out something bad." Diana's brows furrowed. Carlton Industries was a local manufacturing giant with ties to everything from construction to pharmaceuticals. Their name was synonymous with power in Silver Lake. "What kind of bad?" she pressed gently. Liam shook his head, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know all of it. He told me he was gathering evidence. Payments, shipments, things that didn't add up. He said he couldn't ignore it. But then, they found out." Diana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. She knew the dangers of standing up to powerful organizations. The military had taught her that corruption could thrive in the shadows, where it was easiest to hide. "They," she echoed. Liam's voice trembled. "Men in suits. They came to the house 3 nights ago. My dad told me to hide, said it would be okay." His hands tightened around the mug, his knuckles white. "But it wasn't okay. I heard gunshots. He told me to run, and I did. I ran until I couldn't anymore." Diana's chest tightened at the raw grief in his voice. She had seen loss before, but hearing it come from a boy who should have been worrying about school dances and basketball games made her stomach twist. "And the evidence your dad collected?" she asked. "Did he leave it with you?" Liam shook his head, frustration etched across his features. "He told me to trust my instincts, that I'd know where to find it. But I don't know. I just ran. I didn't even." His voice broke, and he turned away, wiping at his face. Diana let the silence settle between them for a moment. She had learned in the military that sometimes words weren't what people needed. They needed time. When Liam finally looked at her again, his expression was a mixture of desperation and determination. "If they find me, they'll kill me too," he whispered. just like my dad. Diana sat back, her mind racing. She hadn't signed up for this. She had left the military to escape danger, not to invite it into her life. But the look in Liam's eyes made her choice clear. "You're right about one thing," she said, her tone steady. "They're not going to stop looking for you, but you're not alone in this anymore." Liam blinked, his brow furrowing. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Diana's lips pressed into a thin line. "I know enough. You're a kid who lost his dad trying to do the right thing. And I've seen too many people get crushed under the weight of injustice. So we're going to figure this out together." The resolve in her voice silenced any argument Liam might have had. He nodded slowly, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear in his expression. "First," Diana continued, "we need to keep you out of sight. If they're watching your house, going back there is out of the question. But you said your dad left you clues." Liam hesitated before nodding. "He had a desk in his office. It was old with a hidden drawer. I saw him open it once. I think whatever he hid is there." Diana's jaw tightened. The house would be under surveillance, no doubt. Sneaking in would require planning and precision. Her military training kicked in as she mentally mapped out the possibilities. "All right," she said finally. "We'll need to scout the house first, figure out their patterns and blind spots. It's going to take time." Liam's shoulders sagged, and he sank deeper into the couch. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "I'm not brave like my dad." Diana leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "Bravery isn't about not being scared, Liam. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you are. Your dad believed in you. Now you need to believe in yourself." The boy's eyes glistened, but he nodded. Diana stood, grabbing a notepad from a nearby table and scribbling a list of supplies they would need for their mission. "Get some rest," she said. "We have a lot to do tomorrow." As Liam settled under the blanket, exhaustion finally overtaking him, Diana sat back in her chair, her mind racing with strategies and contingencies. She didn't know what she had stepped into, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let Liam face it alone. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the footprints they had left behind. But Diana knew that the path ahead was anything but clean. It was treacherous, tangled, and full of danger, yet for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. And she wasn't about to let that go. Laying the foundation. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden streaks across the walls of Diana's modest apartment. The snowfall had ceased, leaving the city covered in a pristine blanket of white. Inside, the warmth of a space heater battled the lingering chill from outside. Diana sat at her small kitchen table, sipping black coffee, her eyes fixed on a rough sketch of Liam's house and the surrounding neighborhood. She had drawn it from Liam's detailed descriptions the night before. Across from her, Liam sat slumped in a chair, staring blankly at a half-eaten piece of toast. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but the restless energy in his fingers as he toyed with a spoon betrayed his anxiety. "You didn't sleep," Diana said, her tone matter-of-fact. Liam glanced up, guilt flickering across his face. "I couldn't stop thinking about everything." Diana nodded, understanding all too well how the mind could trap itself in loops of guilt and worry. "That's normal. But if we're going to do this, you need to focus." Lack of sleep clouds judgment. Liam frowned, his gaze dropping to the table. "I don't even know where to start. I've never done anything like this before." "That's why you have me," Diana said. "We start small. Observe, plan, execute." She tapped the sketch on the table. "Your house is our first target, but before we make any moves, we need intel. How many people are watching it? What's their rotation? Do they patrol or sit in one place? These are the things we need to know." Liam blinked at her, a flicker of awe breaking through his fear. "You've done this before." Diana shrugged. "Something like it. In the military, we called it reconnaissance. It's the same principle, just a different battlefield. Liam leaned forward, curiosity momentarily eclipsing his apprehension. What did you do in the military? Diana hesitated, her gaze flickering to the photo on the wall. I was a team leader in a recon unit. We went into hostile territory, gathered intelligence, and got out before anyone knew we were there. Did you ever get caught? Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Diana's lips twitched into a faint smile. Not when it mattered. Her answer seemed to reassure him, and he sat back, nodding. So, what's the plan? We keep it simple, Diana said, sliding the sketch toward him. Tonight, we scout the area. I'll do the heavy lifting. You'll stay back and keep watch. If things look clear, we'll decide our next move. Liam bit his lip, clearly uneasy. What if they see you? They won't, Diana said firmly. But if they do, I'll handle it. Her confidence didn't erase the worry from his face, but he nodded. Okay. Nightfall. The air was crisp and biting as Diana and Liam crouched behind a row of hedges across the street from his old house. The property loomed in front of them, dark and silent, its windows like unblinking eyes. A street lamp nearby flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on the snow-covered lawn. Liam shivered, more from nerves than the cold. It looked so empty. That's the point, Diana murmured. They wanted to look unimportant. Easier to catch someone off guard that way. She raised a pair of binoculars, scanning the area. The house itself was unlit, but a faint glow from a car parked a few houses down caught her attention. Through the windshield, she spotted two figures inside, their faces illuminated by the bluish glow of a tablet. Two in the car, she said quietly. Not much movement, likely watching for anyone approaching the house. Liam leaned closer, his breath visible in the cold air. They've been there since my dad. His voice faltered, and Diana placed a hand on his shoulder. Hey, focus on the now, she said gently. We're gathering information, not reliving the past. He nodded, swallowing hard. They stayed in their hiding spot for nearly 2 hours, observing the subtle patterns of the watchers. Every 30 minutes, one of the men in the car stepped out, walking the slow perimeter around the block before returning to the vehicle. Diana noted the timing, the paths they took, and the moments when their attention wavered. This isn't a professional team, she muttered. They're sloppy, complacent. What does that mean? Liam asked. It means they're not expecting anyone to challenge them, Diana said. That gives us an advantage. She checked her watch. It was nearly midnight. The streets were deserted, and the house's shadow stretched long across the lawn. Diana turned to Liam, her expression serious. Stay here, she said. I'm going to do a quick pass around the house. What? No, Liam hissed, his eyes wide. What if they see you? They won't, Diana said, pulling a black scarf up to cover her face. I need to confirm there aren't any traps or surprises waiting for us. Stay low and don't move. Before he could protest further, she slipped away, her movements silent and deliberate. Liam watched her disappear into the shadows, his heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at him to follow her, but he stayed put, clutching the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. Diana moved like a ghost, keeping to the edges of the property where the shadows were deepest. She circled the house, checking windows and doors for signs of forced entry or surveillance devices. Near the back, she found footprints in the snow leading to a side door. She crouched, studying the marks. They were fresh, likely from earlier that evening. Her ears pricked at the sound of a distant car engine. Glancing toward the street, she saw the watcher's vehicle shift into gear, its headlights flickering on. Diana ducked low, retreating to the far side of the yard. She pulled out her phone, quickly texting Liam. They're moving. Stay hidden. Liam's reply came almost instantly. What do I do? Nothing, she typed. Let me handle it. The car drove slowly past the house, its occupants scanning the area. Diana pressed herself against the side of a shed, her heart steady but alert. The vehicle paused briefly near their hiding spot before continuing down the street. Once it was out of sight, Diana crept back to Liam, her movements quick but controlled. She found him exactly where she had left him, his face pale but determined. "They're gone for now," she said, pulling off the scarf. "But they'll be back." "Did you see anything?" Liam asked. "Footprints near the side door," Diana said. "Someone's been inside recently. We'll need to move fast if we want to get in and out without being noticed." Liam swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure we can do this?" Diana met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm sure, but I need you to trust me." Liam hesitated before nodding. "Okay, what's next?" Diana glanced at the house, her mind already working through the next steps. "We go in tomorrow night. Same time, same place. I'll come up with a distraction to keep the watchers busy. While they're occupied, we get into the house and find what your dad left behind." As they retreated to the safety of Diana's apartment, Liam felt a strange mix of fear and resolve settling in his chest. For the first time since his world had fallen apart, he wasn't running blindly. He had a plan, and more importantly, he wasn't alone. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that retrieving his father's secrets would be only the beginning. The infiltration. The next night, the city was cloaked in darkness, with the moonlight barely managing to pierce through the low-hanging clouds. The snowfall had paused, leaving the streets silent and still. Diana and Liam crouched in the same spot as before, hidden behind the overgrown hedges. The street lamp nearby flickered, casting sporadic shadows across the neighborhood. Liam's heart raced, his palms slick with sweat, despite the biting cold. He clutched his backpack tightly, his thoughts swirling with doubt. Diana, on the other hand, was a picture of calm, her movements deliberate as she checked her gear. An old utility knife, a small flashlight, and a coil of thin but sturdy rope. "Remember the plan," Diana whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft rustle of the wind. "I create the distraction. Once I signal, you head straight for the side door. Don't hesitate. Don't stop. Get inside, find the hidden drawer, grab the evidence, and get out." Liam nodded, his throat dry. "What if they come back before I'm done?" "They won't," Diana said firmly. "I'll keep them occupied. You just focus on the task." Her confidence was both reassuring and intimidating. Liam envied her composure, wondering if he'd ever feel that kind of steadiness. But then he thought of his father, of the weight in his voice when he had said, "Trust your instincts." Diana tapped his shoulder, pulling him out of his thoughts. "It's time." The distraction. Diana slipped away, moving like a shadow across the street. She had scouted the area earlier in the day and identified a car parked a block away, likely a backup for the watchers. Now, as she approached, she crouched low, using the cover of parked vehicles and snowbanks. When she reached the car, she pulled a small multi-tool from her pocket. With practiced precision, she deflated the front and rear tires on the driver's side. The faint hiss of escaping air was barely noticeable in the quiet night. Satisfied, she moved to the car's rear and unscrewed the license plate, tucking it into her jacket. She sent a quick text to Liam. "Distraction in progress. Be ready." Next, Diana made her way toward a stack of wooden crates behind a nearby hardware store. She had found them earlier and noted their precarious arrangement. A swift shove sent the crates toppling with a loud crash, the sound echoing through the empty streets. She didn't stop to see the reaction. Instead, she darted back toward the car, pulling a small brick from her bag. With a single, decisive swing, she smashed one of the car's taillights, the glass shattering with a satisfying crunch. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. From her position behind a nearby dumpster, she watched as the watcher's car roared to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The vehicle sped toward the source of the noise, leaving the house unguarded. Diana grinned. Now, Liam. The search. Liam's hands trembled as he approached the side door of his old house. The neighborhood was eerily silent, save for the distant hum of the watcher's car disappearing down the street. He glanced back toward Diana's position, but she was out of sight. He was on his own now. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the door's handle. To his surprise, it creaked open. He froze, his heart pounding. Was someone inside? Swallowing his fear, he stepped into the house, closing the door softly behind him. The interior was dark and cold, the air stale from weeks of abandonment. The faint smell of his mother's lavender cleaning spray still lingered, a bittersweet reminder of the life they had left behind. Liam's footsteps were careful, each creak of the floorboards making him wince. He moved through the kitchen, past the empty dining room, and up the stairs to his father's office. The room was just as he remembered it. The massive wooden desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers and old coffee mugs. His father's favorite chair sat slightly askew, as if he had left in a hurry. Liam knelt beside the desk, his hand searching for the hidden compartment. His fingers brushed against the smooth underside until he found the small latch his father had shown him once, years ago. With a soft click, the hidden drawer popped open. Inside was a single USB drive, its sleek silver casing glinting in the dim light. Liam's breath hitched. This was it, the evidence his father had died for. He reached for it, his fingers trembling. Suddenly, the faint hum of a car engine reached his ears, growing louder by the second. Panic surged through him. The watchers were coming back. The escape. Liam shoved the USB drive into his pocket and bolted down the stairs, his heart hammering in his chest. As he reached the back door, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel and the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming shut. "Check the back," a gruff voice barked. Liam froze, his mind racing. He couldn't go out the way he came. Thinking quickly, he darted toward the living room, where the curtains were drawn over a large bay window. Peeking through a small gap, he saw two figures with flashlights approaching the house, their beams cutting through the darkness. A faint whistle reached his ears, a signal from Diana. It came from the direction of the front yard. She was still creating a diversion, drawing their attention away from him. Summoning his courage, Liam unlocked the front door and slipped outside, staying low. He moved swiftly across the lawn, his footsteps muffled by the snow. His breath puffed out in frantic bursts as he rounded the corner and sprinted toward the alley where Diana had told him to meet her. The reunion. Diana was waiting for him, crouched behind a stack of wooden pallets. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed her relief when she saw him. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Liam nodded, pulling the USB drive from his pocket. "It was in the desk, just like I thought." Diana allowed herself a brief smile. "Good. Let's move." They navigated the alleys and back streets, sticking to the shadows until they reached Diana's car, parked several blocks away. Once inside, Liam slumped against the seat, his adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. Diana started the car and pulled onto the main road, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror for any signs of pursuit. "You did good, Liam," she said after a moment. "Your dad would be proud." Liam didn't respond immediately. He stared at the USB drive in his hands, its weight suddenly feeling monumental. "What if this isn't enough?" he murmured. "What if it doesn't stop them?" Diana's grip on the wheel tightened. "We'll figure it out," she said, "one step at a time." As the city lights blurred past, Liam felt a strange mix of fear and determination settle in his chest. The evidence they had retrieved was only the beginning. The fight for justice, for his father's legacy, was far from over. And with Diana by his side, he knew he wouldn't have to face it alone. Unlocking the secrets. The warmth of Diana's apartment wrapped around Liam like a protective cocoon as he sat cross-legged on the living room floor. The USB drive sat in front of him on the coffee table, a small but powerful object that seemed to radiate significance. Diana paced behind him, her arms crossed, her mind clearly working through the possible dangers ahead. "What do you think is on it?" Liam asked, his voice quiet. He was still catching his breath after their daring escape from his house, but the tension of their success hadn't faded. "Hopefully, enough to answer some questions," Diana replied, stopping her pacing to glance at the drive. "But it could also be the very thing that puts a target on us." Liam's stomach churned. He'd thought about that. The possibility that the information could make things worse, but the thought of his father, the life he'd sacrificed to protect Liam and gather this evidence, gave him strength. "We need to see what's on it," he said, his voice firmer now. "We can't let them get away with what they did to him." Diana regarded him for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. But if this is as big as it seems, we're going to need to be smart about how we handle it." She went to her desk and pulled out an old laptop. "We'll use this," she explained. "It's not connected to the internet, and it doesn't have anything that can trace back to us. Just in case." Liam swallowed hard as she inserted the USB drive. The screen flickered to life, displaying a folder labeled simply, "Carlton Industries. Files. The evidence." Diana clicked on the folder, and a series of documents, spreadsheets, and video files appeared. Liam leaned forward, his breath catching as he recognized some of the names and terms. Carlton Industries, shipments, and internal memos. Diana opened the first file, a spreadsheet filled with rows of cryptic entries. "Look at this," she murmured, her eyes scanning the screen. "Shipment records, dates, locations, and payments. These numbers don't add up. It's like they're deliberately inflating costs." Liam pointed at a column labeled Destination. "What's Pinnacle Holdings?" Diana frowned. "It's a shell company. A fake business used to move money without raising suspicion. These shipments are probably going to places Carlton doesn't want anyone to know about." She opened another file, this one a memo marked confidential. As Diana read aloud, Liam's stomach turned. "To all senior staff," she began, her voice tight with anger. "Ensure all financial records related to Pinnacle Holdings remain separate from Carlton's main database. The fewer eyes on this, the better. Compliance is non-negotiable." Liam clenched his fists. "They were hiding it on purpose. My dad said he found missing shipments and weird payments. This is it." He was right. Diana nodded, her jaw tight. "But this isn't just about shipments. It's about what they're shipping and why. Let's keep digging." They opened a video file next. The grainy footage showed a warehouse filled with crates. Workers moved quickly, loading boxes onto trucks. At first glance, it seemed mundane, but then the camera zoomed in on one of the crates. Diana paused the video. "What's that?" The crate had a label stamped on it. "Biohazard. Level 4. Liam's blood ran cold. "Biohazard. That's dangerous, right?" "It's not just dangerous," Diana said, her voice low. "Level 4 means it's potentially deadly. Carlton isn't just shipping supplies. They're moving something they shouldn't have." The next document confirmed her fears. It was an email exchange between two Carlton executives. The tone was professional, but the implications were chilling. "Shipment 47 to Pinnacle has been delayed due to security concerns. Ensure no media coverage. The last thing we need is public scrutiny before the trial phase is complete." "What trial phase?" Liam asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Diana admitted, her brow furrowed. "But it sounds like they're testing something, and they don't want anyone to know." A deadly revelation. As they continued to sift through the files, a clearer picture began to emerge. Carlton Industries had been funneling resources into secret projects, using Pinnacle Holdings to mask their activities. These projects weren't just shady, they were dangerous. The files referenced chemical compounds, unauthorized trials, and undisclosed casualties. Liam's hands shook as he read one report detailing an incident at a remote testing site. It described unforeseen complications, resulting in the loss of all test subjects. The language was clinical, devoid of emotion, But the weight of the words hit Liam like a sledgehammer. "These aren't just numbers and files," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "These are lives. They're killing people." Diana placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "And your father tried to stop them. He gathered all of this to expose the truth." Liam nodded, tears pricking his eyes. "But it cost him everything." Forming a plan. Diana closed the laptop and leaned back, her mind racing. "This is big, Liam. Bigger than I thought. Your dad didn't just stumble on a few bad records. He uncovered a conspiracy. And now we're sitting on the proof." "But what do we do with it?" Liam asked. "Who would believe us?" "We don't need them to believe us," Diana said, her voice sharp with determination. "We need to make it undeniable. We find someone who can publish this, someone who can get it in front of the right people." "You mean like a journalist?" Liam asked. "Yes," Diana said. "But not just any journalist. Someone with the guts to stand up to Carlton and the resources to protect themselves." Liam hesitated. "How do we find someone like that?" Diana's gaze hardened. "I know a few people from my time in the service. One of them owes me a favor, a big one." Her words gave Liam a sliver of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. "What if Carlton finds us first?" "They won't," Diana said firmly. "We'll stay one step ahead. But we have to move fast." The stakes rise. As the night wore on, the weight of their discovery pressed down on them. Liam watched as Diana made calls, her voice calm but commanding as she reached out to old contacts. Each conversation was brief, ending with a promise to follow up. Meanwhile, Liam couldn't stop staring at the USB drive. It felt like a ticking time bomb, something both priceless and perilous. He thought of his father again, of the courage it must have taken to gather this information, knowing the risks. Finally, Diana hung up the phone and turned to him. "We have a lead. There's a reporter, Elliot Grayson. He's known for exposing corruption, and he has connections to major outlets. If anyone can help us, it's him." Liam nodded, though his chest tightened at the thought of sharing his father's secrets with a stranger. "When do we meet him?" "Tomorrow," Diana said. "But until then, we stay low. No phones, no contact with anyone. Carlton's people will be looking for us." Liam's fear was palpable, but so was his determination. He wasn't just fighting for his father anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had been hurt by Carlton's greed. As he lay on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, he felt the first flicker of hope since his father's death. They had a plan. They had the truth. But he also knew that the most dangerous part of their journey was still ahead. A dangerous ally. The following morning, Diana and Liam sat in the back corner of a dimly lit diner, their faces partially obscured by the low-hanging shade of the booth. The hum of muted conversation and the clink of coffee cups provided a thin veil of anonymity, but both remained alert. Diana's sharp eyes flicked between the window and the entrance, scanning for anything out of place. Across from them sat Elliot Grayson, a seasoned investigative journalist whose reputation for taking down corporate giants was as formidable as his weathered appearance. His salt and pepper hair framed a face marked by years of relentless pursuit of the truth, and his piercing blue eyes were fixed on the USB drive that Diana had slid across the table. "So, you're telling me," Elliot began, his voice low and skeptical, "that Carlton Industries is running a secret operation involving biohazardous materials, human trials, and murder?" "Yes," Diana said firmly, "and we have the evidence to prove it." Elliot leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You do realize what you're up against, right? Carlton has the resources to crush anyone who so much as breathes a word against them." "That's why we came to you," Diana replied, her tone unwavering. "You've taken down bigger players than Carlton." Elliot smirked, though there was no humor in it. Flattery won't make this any less suicidal. But he picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his fingers. "If what you're saying is true, this could be the story of the decade." "It is," Liam said, his voice breaking through the tension. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. My dad died for this. He wanted the truth to come out, and now it's up to us to make sure it does. Elliot studied Liam for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if we're doing this, we do it my way. That means no rash moves, no leaks, and no mistakes. What's the plan? Diana asked, cutting straight to the point. Elliot slid the drive into a small pouch and tucked it into his coat pocket. First, I verify the files. If they're legit, I'll pull in some trusted contacts, people who can amplify the story and keep it safe. But we'll need more than what's on here. Carlton's lawyers will tear this apart unless we hit them with something airtight. What do you mean more? Liam asked, a note of panic creeping into his voice. That's everything my dad risked his life for. Elliot leaned forward, his tone softening. I'm not saying it's not enough, kid. I'm saying we need corroboration. Witnesses, additional documentation, anything that can reinforce the story. Liam's shoulders slumped. My dad was the only one who knew everything. He's gone. Diana placed a reassuring hand on his arm. There's always more. We just have to find it. Shadows closing in. Later that evening, back at Diana's apartment, tension hung thick in the air. Liam sat on the couch, staring at the floor as Diana reviewed a list of names and locations Elliot had sent over. Each entry represented a potential lead. Former employees, contractors, and others who might know pieces of Carlton's secret operations. I don't know if I can do this, Liam admitted quietly, breaking the silence. Diana looked up, her expression softening. Liam, you've already done more than most people your age ever will. But this isn't just about you or your dad anymore. It's about stopping something much bigger. Liam nodded slowly, though the weight of responsibility was evident in his eyes. I feel like I'm going to mess it up. You won't, Diana said firmly, because you're not doing this alone. The sharp buzz of Diana's phone interrupted them. She checked the screen. A message from Elliot. Files verified. Carlton is dirtier than we thought. Need to meet ASAP. Location secured. Be careful. They're looking for you. Diana's jaw tightened. She showed the message to Liam, who paled at the implication. They know we're out here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They'll be watching for movement, Diana said, already shifting into action. She pulled a duffel bag from the closet and began packing essentials. Documents, first aid supplies, and her old sidearm, which she loaded with swift precision. What are we doing? Liam asked, his voice tinged with panic. We're meeting Elliot at his safe house, Diana said. But we can't take a direct route. If Carlton's people are looking for us, we need to throw them off. The chase. Under the cover of night, Diana and Liam left the apartment through the back entrance, slipping into the alleyway. They kept to the shadows, their breaths visible in the icy air. Diana led the way, her movements deliberate and silent, while Liam followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. As they navigated the maze of side streets and alleys, the sound of an approaching vehicle made them freeze. Diana pulled Liam into the shadows of a dumpster just as a black SUV rolled past, its headlights sweeping the area. Stay still, Diana whispered, her hand on Liam's shoulder. The SUV paused at the end of the alley, its engine idling. For a moment, it felt as if the entire world had stopped, the only sound the faint rumble of the vehicle. Then, with a low growl, the SUV turned the corner and disappeared. Diana exhaled slowly. They're definitely looking for us. Why don't we just call the police? Liam asked, his voice shaking. Because Carlton probably owns half the police force, Diana replied. We can't trust anyone but ourselves. They continued their trek, weaving through the city in a deliberately erratic pattern. By the time they reached Elliot's safe house, a nondescript building on the outskirts of town, it was nearly midnight. The safe house. Elliot opened the door the moment they knocked, ushering them inside quickly. The safe house was small and utilitarian, with reinforced locks on the doors and windows. A large map of the city covered one wall, marked with pins and annotations. "I wasn't followed," Elliot said, locking the door behind them. "But Carlton's goons are getting bolder. They've been asking questions all over town." "We noticed," Diana said grimly. "What's the next move?" Elliot gestured to a stack of papers and a laptop on the table. "I started piecing together the evidence into a cohesive story. But we need to act fast. Carlton's legal team will be on this the moment we go public." Liam stepped forward, his fear replaced by determination. "What do you need me to do?" Elliot hesitated, then nodded toward the map. "There's a facility Carlton uses for storage. If your dad's files mention shipments, there might be physical evidence there, something we can't refute." Diana frowned. "You're suggesting we break in?" "I'm suggesting we finish what Robert started," Elliot said. "This is the last piece of the puzzle." Liam looked at Diana, his jaw set. "I'm in." Diana sighed, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "Then we'd better make this count." As the three of them began to plan their next move, a sense of urgency settled over the room. The battle against Carlton was far from over, but for the first time, they had a clear target, and the resolve to see it through. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of a storm. But inside the safe house, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would shake the foundations of Carlton Industries and expose the truth to the world. The reckoning. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking monolith of metal and shadow on the city's industrial outskirts. Its weathered walls bore no markings to suggest it belonged to Carlton Industries, but the faint hum of security cameras and the glint of motion detectors told Diana everything she needed to know. They were in the right place. Liam crouched behind a stack of shipping pallets, his breath visible in the frigid night air. Beside him, Diana reviewed the plan one final time, her voice calm but firm. "Liam, you're my eyes and ears. Keep watch on the north side while Elliot and I get inside. If you see anything at all, you signal me immediately." "Understood." Liam nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Got it." Elliot adjusted the strap of the small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Inside were tools to bypass electronic locks, a portable hard drive for downloading files, and a small camera for capturing evidence. "We get in, we get what we need, and we get out," he said, his tone all business. "No heroics." Diana glanced at Liam, then back at the warehouse. "All right, let's move." The infiltration. Diana and Elliot approached the side entrance, keeping low to avoid the cameras. The door was secured with an electronic keypad, but Elliot had come prepared. He pulled a small device from his bag, attaching it to the keypad. Lights on the device blinked in a rapid sequence before turning green with a soft peep. "Easy," he whispered, pushing the door open. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous and eerily silent, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. Rows of metal shelves stretched toward the ceiling, each packed with crates and barrels. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the floor. Diana gestured for Elliot to follow her as she led the way down a central aisle, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of movement. They reached a cluster of offices near the back of the building, their frosted glass windows glowing faintly from the light inside. "Jackpot," Elliot muttered, pulling out his camera. "Let's see what Carlton's been hiding." Unearthing the truth. Inside the largest office, they found a desk cluttered with papers, a computer terminal, and several filing cabinets. Elliot immediately set to work, connecting his hard drive to the computer. "Give me a few minutes to copy everything," he said, typing rapidly. "Keep an eye out." Diana positioned herself by the door, her senses on high alert. As Elliot worked, she glanced at the papers on the desk. One caught her attention, a shipping manifest marked Pinnacle Holdings. Her stomach churned as she read the list of contents, chemical compounds, specialized machinery, and personnel transfer logs. "What the hell are they doing here?" she murmured, her mind racing. "Diana," Elliot called, his voice tense. "You're gonna want to see this." She crossed the room to the computer, where Elliot had pulled up a series of emails. The subject lines alone were damning. Phase 2 testing results. Subject mortality rates. Containment breach protocols. The contents were worse. Carlton had been conducting human trials on experimental chemical agents, many of which had lethal side effects. The trials were conducted off the books, with subjects recruited from vulnerable populations under false pretenses. "This is a nightmare," Elliot said, his voice shaking. "If this gets out, Carlton is finished." Diana clenched her fists, her anger barely contained. "They've been using people as lab rats, killing them to protect their bottom line." A faint crackle interrupted their thoughts, the sound of a walkie-talkie. Diana's blood ran cold. She turned toward the office door, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. The threat escalates. Outside, Liam crouched behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding as he watched two figures enter the warehouse through a side door. They wore dark uniforms, and their movements were deliberate, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Diana," Liam whispered into the small radio she had given him. "They're here." Inside the office, Diana and Elliot exchanged a tense glance. "How many?" Diana asked. "2, maybe 3, Liam replied, his voice trembling. "They're heading your way." Elliot unplugged the hard drive and stuffed it into his bag. "We've got what we need," he said. "Time to go." Diana nodded. "Liam, stay put. We'll meet you at the rendezvous point." "No way," Liam said. "I'm not leaving you." "Liam, listen to me," Diana said, her tone firm but not unkind. "We can handle this. Just stay out of sight." A deadly game of cat and mouse. Diana and Elliot slipped out of the office, keeping to the shadows as the sound of footsteps grew louder. The guards moved in a tight formation, their flashlights sweeping across the aisles. Diana gestured for Elliot to head toward the back exit, while she stayed behind to create a diversion. She grabbed a metal wrench from a nearby shelf and hurled it down an adjacent aisle. The clang of metal on concrete echoed through the warehouse, drawing the guards' attention. "This way," one of them barked, moving toward the noise. Diana moved in the opposite direction, her steps silent as she navigated the maze of shelves. She caught sight of Liam, peeking out from his hiding spot, and motioned for him to stay put. To her relief, he nodded, though his face was pale with fear. As Diana rounded a corner, she came face to face with one of the guards. For a split second, both froze. Then, instinct took over. Diana ducked as the guard swung his flashlight, delivering a swift blow to his ribs that sent him sprawling. She disarmed him in a fluid motion, tossing his walkie-talkie into a nearby barrel of oil. The second guard's voice crackled over the remaining walkie-talkie. "What's going on?" Diana didn't wait to find out. She signaled to Elliot and Liam, who were already making their way to the exit. The escape. The three of them bolted through the back door, the icy night air hitting them like a wall. They sprinted across the snow-covered yard, their breaths ragged. Behind them, shouts and the sound of boots crunching in the snow grew louder. Diana spotted their getaway car parked a block away. "Go!" she shouted, covering their retreat. Elliot and Liam piled into the car, while Diana turned to face the pursuing guards. She pulled her sidearm and fired 2 warning shots into the air, causing the men to halt and dive for cover. It bought her just enough time to climb into the driver's seat and peel away. As they sped down the deserted streets, Liam clutched the hard drive like a lifeline. "Did we get everything?" "More than enough," Elliot said, his voice tinged with both relief and exhaustion. "Now we just need to make sure it sees the light of day." The reckoning begins. Back at the safe house, Diana, Liam, and Elliot worked through the night, compiling the evidence into a comprehensive exposé. By dawn, the files were ready to be sent to multiple trusted media outlets, ensuring that Carlton couldn't silence the story before it broke. As Liam watched the upload bar fill, a wave of emotion washed over him. His father's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The truth would finally come out. Diana placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but steady. "Your dad would be proud." Liam nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We did it." Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, signaling the start of a new day. A day that would bring justice, no matter the cost. Justice in the light. The morning light spilled through the blinds of the safe house, casting long golden streaks across the room. The upload had finished hours ago, and now it was a waiting game. The files had been sent to multiple major media outlets, each with detailed instructions on how to verify and publish the information. Elliot had also reached out to trusted contacts in law enforcement, ensuring that Carlton Industries wouldn't be able to suppress the truth through legal intimidation alone. Liam sat at the table, his fingers gripping a mug of lukewarm coffee. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the events of the past few days in an endless loop. Across from him, Diana leaned against the wall, her arms crossed as she watched the street through the window. "How long do you think it'll take?" Liam asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Not long," Diana replied. "Once the media gets hold of this, they'll move fast. Carlton's too big a target to ignore." Elliot, seated at his laptop, tapped furiously at the keys. "We're already seeing movement," he said, tilting the screen toward them. Several news sites had begun running teasers about a major corporate scandal, promising full exposes within the hour. Liam felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by fear. What if Carlton comes after us? What if they? "They will," Diana interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact. "But that's why we took precautions. By the time they figure out where the files came from, it'll be too late." Elliot nodded, his expression grim. "They'll try damage control, spin this as a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. But the evidence is too overwhelming. They won't be able to explain away biohazard trials and human casualties." Liam nodded, though the weight of it all still pressed heavily on his chest. I wish my dad could see this. He deserved to see them fall." "He will," Diana said softly, stepping closer. "Because this isn't just about exposing Carlton. It's about honoring what he stood for." The media storm. By midday, the story had exploded. Major news outlets were running detailed articles and broadcasts, each one diving into the files Liam's father had risked everything to gather. Headlines screamed about the corruption at Carlton Industries. Carlton Industries exposed. Illegal biohazard trials linked to deaths. Whistleblowers' evidence reveals corporate conspiracy. Documents uncover secret testing and financial fraud at Carlton. Social media was ablaze with outrage. Hashtags like #JusticeForDaniels and #StopCarlton began trending worldwide. Videos of protests outside Carlton's headquarters flooded the internet, with people demanding accountability. Liam scrolled through the news on Diana's phone, his chest tightening as he read the tributes to his father. People were calling him a hero, a man who had stood against insurmountable odds to expose the truth. Tears welled in Liam's eyes. "He did it," he whispered. "He really did it." Diana placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but comforting. "You did it, Liam. Your dad started this fight, but you finished it." Carlton's retaliation. The victory, however, was not without its risks. By evening, news broke that Carlton had issued a statement denying the allegations, calling the files fabricated and accusing the media of sensationalism. But their denials rang hollow as more evidence surfaced: photos, testimonies, and internal emails that corroborated the story. Despite this, Carlton's lawyers moved swiftly, filing injunctions against several media outlets and attempting to track the source of the leak. It wasn't long before Diana's phone buzzed with a cryptic text from one of Elliot's contacts. "They know about the safe house. Get out now. Diana's jaw tightened as she read the message. We've been compromised. Elliot looked up from his laptop, his face pale. How? It doesn't matter, Diana said, already packing their belongings. We need to move. Liam's heart raced as he grabbed his jacket. Where do we go? Diana didn't hesitate. I have a backup plan. The final confrontation. As night fell, Diana led Liam and Elliot to an abandoned industrial building on the outskirts of the city. It was far from ideal, but it was secure, and they needed a place to regroup. They entered through a rusted side door, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Diana set up a perimeter, placing improvised alarms at key entry points. Elliot worked on encrypting their remaining files, ensuring they couldn't be traced if Carlton's people found them. Liam sat on a crate, his nerves frayed. Do you think they'll find us here? Diana crouched beside him, her expression calm but serious. Maybe. But if they do, we'll be ready. Her words were tested sooner than expected. Just after midnight, the faint hum of engines echoed outside. Diana's makeshift alarms, a series of empty cans strung along the entrances, rattled softly. They're here, she said, her voice steady. Stay quiet. She motioned for Elliot and Liam to hide behind a stack of crates while she positioned herself near the entrance, her sidearm drawn. The door creaked open, and the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness. Two men entered, their movements deliberate. They were dressed in dark suits, their polished shoes incongruous in the gritty warehouse. One carried a handgun, the other a tablet displaying a map. They were here, one of them said, his voice low. Signal the team. Before he could finish, Diana stepped into view, her weapon trained on him. That's close enough. The men froze, their eyes narrowing. You must be Diana Cooper, the armed man said. Former military. Impressive record. And you must be Carlton's cleanup crew, Diana replied coldly. Not so impressive. The man smirked. You've made a lot of enemies, Ms. Cooper. But this ends now. Before he could raise his weapon, Diana fired, the shot grazing his arm and forcing him to drop the gun. The second man lunged for her, but Diana dodged, delivering a sharp blow that sent him sprawling. Stay down, she ordered, her voice like steel. Behind the crates, Liam's heart pounded as he watched Diana take control of the situation. She moved with precision, her every action calculated and efficient. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Justice secured. By the time the authorities arrived, tipped off by one of Elliot's trusted contacts, the two men were restrained and the remaining files had been secured. Diana, Liam, and Elliot were taken in for questioning, but thanks to the overwhelming evidence, they were released within hours. Over the next few weeks, the fallout for Carlton Industries was catastrophic. Executives were arrested, lawsuits piled up, and the company's stock plummeted. The public outcry forced government agencies to launch investigations, ensuring that Carlton's operations would be dismantled for good. Liam stood at his father's grave one crisp morning, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. The headstone was simple but elegant, etched with the words, Robert Daniels, a man who stood for truth. I hope I made you proud, Dad, Liam whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I hope I did enough. You did more than enough, Diana said, standing beside him. Your father gave you the tools, but you had the courage to use them. Liam looked up at her, a faint smile on his face. I couldn't have done it without you. Diana placed a hand on his shoulder. Your dad would have been proud, and you should be too. As they walked away from the grave, the weight on Liam's chest felt lighter. His father's legacy was secure, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The fight for justice was far from over, but he knew he was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had turned the tide, proving that even in the darkest moments, the truth could shine brighter than any shadow.